Marcus Chun was just a software engineer from Detroit who accidentally married a goddess. What the divine realm didn't expect was that humans don't just adapt to power, they optimize it, debug it, and then rewrite the entire cosmic operating system from scratch. When the gods finally noticed the mortal who had been quietly revolutionizing their eternal domains, it was already too late. The man who once struggled to assemble IKEA furniture had become something they never thought possible. A human who didn't just wield divine power, but understood it better than beings who had existed since the dawn of creation. This is the story of how humanity's greatest strength, the ability to look at any system and ask, but could we make this better, accidentally broke the universe and remade it in ways that would make even the oldest gods question everything they thought they knew about power, mortality, and what it truly means to be divine. Marcus Chun had always been the kind of person who read instruction manuals for fun. His Detroit apartment was filled with perfectly organized electronics, each cable managed with military precision, and his computer setup hummed with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that everything could be optimized, which made it particularly ironic that his life was about to become the most chaotic thing imaginable. The coffee shop on Fifth Street was where it all started, though Marcus wouldn't understand the significance for months. He was debugging code on his laptop, muttering about inefficient algorithms when she walked in. Tall, with silver hair that seemed to catch light that wasn't there, and eyes that held depths Marcus couldn't quite process. She ordered tea that steamed despite the barista never heating the water, and when she smiled at the confused teenager behind the counter, Marcus swore he saw flowers bloom in the reflection of the window. "Interesting solution," she said, appearing beside his table as if space had simply rearranged itself around her. She was looking at a screen where lines of code scrolled past in neat, logical sequences. "You can read C++?" Marcus asked, surprised. Most people's eyes glazed over when they saw his work. "I can read the intent behind it. You're not just solving the problem. You're solving every future version of the problem that might exist." She tilted her head, studying him with the intensity of someone examining a particularly fascinating specimen. "I'm Lurale. Marcus. And thanks, I guess. Most people think I over-engineer everything." She laughed, and Marcus could have sworn he heard wind chimes in the sound. Over-engineering is just thorough preparation wearing a disguise. "May I sit?" What followed was the strangest conversation of Marcus's life. Lyralii seemed to know things she shouldn't. The fundamental principles behind quantum computing before he mentioned his side project, the mathematical elegance of solutions to problems he hadn't yet described. She spoke about patterns and systems with the casual authority of someone who had watched civilizations rise and fall, and yet she listened to his explanations of mundane programming concepts with genuine fascination. "You see connections others miss," she said after he'd spent 20 minutes explaining why he'd rewritten his apartment's entire home automation system from scratch. "Most beings accept the world as they find it. You look at everything and ask how it could work better. Doesn't everyone?" Marcus asked. The way she smiled then, tender and slightly sad, should have been his first clue that Lyralii wasn't exactly human. They started meeting regularly. Coffee dates became long walks through Detroit's slowly revitalizing downtown, where Marcus would point out architectural inefficiencies and Lyralii would make observations about human nature that were both profound and oddly clinical, as if she were describing a species she found endearing but alien. She never talked much about her work, just mentioned consulting and systems management in ways that suggested responsibilities Marcus couldn't quite grasp. It was during one of these walks, 3 months after they'd met, that Marcus first witnessed something that should have been impossible. A child had fallen into the Detroit River, swept away by currents too strong for the panicked adults on the shore. Lyralii moved with fluid grace, stepping onto the water's surface as if it were solid ground, reaching the child in seconds and returning with the same impossible calm. "How did you—" Marcus started. "I'm good at water sports," she said, setting the gasping child safely on the dock. The emergency responders who arrived moments later accepted this explanation without question, their eyes sliding away from any details that didn't fit their understanding of reality. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He'd replayed the scene 100 times, analyzing it from every angle his logical mind could construct. People didn't walk on water. Physics didn't work that way. But he'd seen it happen, recorded it on his phone's camera, only to find the video showed nothing but empty river and confused bystanders. "There's something you need to know about me," Lyralii said the next day, before he could voice any of his questions. They were in his apartment, and she was examining his bookshelves with the same careful attention she'd given his code. "I'm not entirely human." Marcus looked at her, really looked, and suddenly noticed details his rational mind had been carefully ignoring. The way shadows bent around her even in direct light. How electronic devices worked better in her presence. Their displays brighter and responses faster. The fact that he'd never seen her eat or drink anything, despite countless meals together. "What are you exactly?" he asked, his programmer's brain already trying to categorize this new information. "I suppose the closest human term would be a goddess. Minor one, really. I manage certain aspects of the natural world, rivers, streams, the flow of water through living systems." She turned to face him, and for a moment, Marcus saw something vast and ancient behind her eyes, like looking into deep ocean trenches. "I've been watching humanity for centuries, fascinated by how you adapt and change everything you touch. But I've never met someone who looks at problems the way you do." Marcus sat down hard on his couch, his mind racing through implications. "Goddess, actual godis, manages water systems." He looked up at her. "That's why my shower pressure improved after our second date." She had the grace to look embarrassed. "You mentioned the building's plumbing was inefficient, and you just fixed it?" "The whole building. It was a small adjustment." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the same methodical approach he used for debugging complex code. Find the error, trace its origins, understand the system, implement a solution. Except the system was apparently reality itself, and the error was his assumption that his girlfriend was human. "Okay," he said finally. "I have questions. I expected you would. How does divine power work? Is it energy-based? Matter manipulation? Some kind of quantum field interaction?" Lyralii blinked, clearly not expecting these particular questions. It just is. I will things to be different, and they change according to my nature and domain. But there has to be underlying principles. Conservation of energy, thermodynamics, some kind of operational framework." Marcus was getting excited now, the way he did when presented with a new system to understand. "You said you manage water flow. What's the scope of that? Molecular level? Regional weather patterns? Can you affect water inside living organisms?" "I've never really thought about the technical aspects," Lyralii admitted. "Divine power isn't something we typically analyze. It simply exists." Marcus stared at her with the expression he usually reserved for colleagues who wrote code without comments. "You have reality-altering abilities, and you've never tried to understand how they work. Should I have? Should you have?" Marcus stood up, beginning to pace. "Lyralii, you're basically a living physics violation with a user interface to the fundamental forces of the universe, and you're telling me nobody's ever written documentation for this system?" She watched him pace, a slow smile spreading across her face. "You're not afraid." "Afraid? I am fascinated. Do you realize what this means? If divine power operates according to consistent rules, which it must, or reality would be completely unstable, then those rules can be understood, optimized, improved." He stopped pacing and looked at her with growing excitement. "You're not just a goddess. You're a user with admin privileges to the cosmic operating system." I'm not sure the other gods would appreciate that analogy. "There are others?" "Of course there are others. Is there some kind of divine hierarchy? Distributed authority? Central management?" Marcus was already pulling out his notebook, the one he used for system architecture planning. "How do you handle conflict resolution when domains overlap? What about redundancy and failover systems?" Lyralii watched him fill pages with questions and diagrams, her expression shifting from amusement to something deeper. "Marcus," she said softly, "the divine realm isn't designed for analysis. It's ancient, traditional. Things work the way they've always worked because that's how they've always worked." Marcus looked up from his notes. "That's the most terrifying sentence I've ever heard." "Why?" "Because that's how it's always worked is what people say right before everything breaks catastrophically. No system is perfect. Everything can be improved." He set down his pen and took her hands. "Lyralii, I think I'm falling in love with you, both as a person and as the most interesting technical challenge I've ever encountered." She laughed, that wind chime sound that made his apartment's plants grow a little greener. "I love you too, even if you were the strangest mortal I've ever met." "Good, because I want to understand everything about how this works. And I want to meet these other gods. That's not typically done. Mortals don't usually visit the divine realm. They're not built for it." Marcus grinned, the expression he got when he'd found an elegant solution to a complex problem. "Then, I guess we'll have to figure out how to rebuild me." The marriage proposal came 2 weeks later, though it wasn't quite what either of them expected. Marcus had spent the intervening time conducting what he called preliminary research, which mostly involved asking Lyralii increasingly detailed questions about divine power while taking careful notes. By the time he presented her with a ring, a simple band embedded with sensors that could detect and measure energy fluctuations, he'd filled 3 notebooks with theories about the fundamental nature of reality. "I don't want to just marry you," he explained as she examined the ring with professional curiosity. "I want to understand you, your world, how everything works. And I think I can help make it better." "Better how?" "More efficient, more stable, more elegant." Marcus pulled out his latest notebook, filled with architectural diagrams that looked like circuit boards designed by someone who thought in cosmic terms. "From what you've described, the divine realm runs on legacy code that's thousands of years old. No documentation, no version control, no standardized interfaces between domains. It's a miracle anything works at all." Lyralii studied the diagrams, her divine senses beginning to recognize patterns that resonated with something deep and fundamental. These are actually quite beautiful. They're just preliminary sketches. But yes, I think we can build something beautiful. If you'll have me. The divine realm might not accept a mortal husband." Marcus grinned. "Then I guess we'll have to convince them to upgrade their acceptance protocols." The wedding itself was a small affair. Just the 2 of them, a confused judge who kept forgetting why the bride seemed to glow, and paperwork that Marcus insisted on filing in triplicate. But the moment Lyralii said, "I do," something fundamental shifted in the cosmic architecture of reality. Marcus felt it first as a strange tingling, then as an awareness that expanded beyond his physical senses. Information flooded his consciousness, data streams about water tables and river flows, atmospheric moisture content, the cellular hydration of every living thing within a 100-mile radius. It was overwhelming and beautiful and completely, utterly fascinating. "Is this normal?" he asked, watching his hands sparkle with what looked like liquid starlight. "Not even remotely," Lyralii replied, her own power resonating with his in ways that created small miracles around them. Flowers blooming from concrete, fountain water flowing upward in perfect spirals, the air itself humming with potential. "I think marrying me just gave you access to my divine domain." Marcus looked down at the wedding ring on his finger, then at the way reality seemed to be responding to his thoughts with increasing enthusiasm. "Oh," he said quietly, "oh, this is going to be interesting." In the divine realm, an emergency session was being called. Ancient beings who had managed the fundamental forces of reality since the dawn of creation were receiving alerts that something significant had changed in the cosmic order. A new presence had appeared in the divine network, someone with unprecedented access to the source code of existence itself, someone who was already asking questions about efficiency improvements. "What do you mean, a mortal has admin access?" demanded Chronothes, god of time and cosmic order. I mean exactly that, replied Thessarian, whose job it was to monitor divine power distributions. Lyralii of the Rivers has somehow granted full domain privileges to a human. He's currently reviewing our entire operational framework. That's impossible. Mortals can't handle divine power. This one seems to be handling it just fine. Better than fine, actually. He's already submitted 17 improvement proposals. Chronothes felt something he hadn't experienced in millennia. Genuine concern. Show me. The cosmic display that materialized showed a human male sitting in what appeared to be a modest apartment, surrounded by notebooks and electronic devices, making careful notes while testing small applications of divine power. As they watched, he successfully optimized the flow rate of every river on the North American continent, reducing inefficiencies by 37% while improving ecosystem health. He's been divine for 6 hours, Thessarian reported, and he's already surpassed most of our efficiency benchmarks. Chronothes studied the readings more carefully. What's his background? Software engineer. Specializes in systems optimization and debugging legacy code. Thessarian paused. He's already identified 14 critical vulnerabilities in our foundational protocols. Alert the Council, Chronothes said grimly. I think we have a problem. Back on Earth, Marcus was having the time of his life. Literally, he discovered that divine power responded beautifully to logical frameworks, and he'd already built a simple interface that let him monitor and adjust water-related phenomena across multiple scales simultaneously. Detroit's water infrastructure was now running at 96% efficiency. The Great Lakes had achieved perfect pH balance, and every person in a 50-mile radius was experiencing optimal hydration. You're enjoying this, Lyralii observed, watching him work with divine power, as if he'd been born to it. It's elegant, Marcus replied, making minor adjustments to atmospheric moisture that were causing small rainbows to appear over the city. The underlying architecture is actually quite beautiful once you understand the API, though whoever wrote the original code really could have used better commenting practices. The original code was written by the creator at the dawn of existence. Marcus paused in his work. Well, that explains the lack of documentation. Probably working under a tight deadline. He looked thoughtful. I wonder if they're available for consultation on the upgrade. In a cosmic distance, something vast and amused stirred for the first time in eons. The summons arrived 3 days later, though calling it a summons was like calling a hurricane a gentle breeze. Marcus was in the middle of optimizing the Detroit River's sediment distribution when reality suddenly folded around him like origami made of light and impossible angles. One moment he was in his apartment. The next he stood in a vast hall that seemed to exist in several dimensions simultaneously. Fascinating architecture, he said, pulling out his notebook to sketch the space-time geometries he was observing. Non-Euclidean load-bearing structures, probability-based foundations. Whoever designed this really understood multidimensional engineering. Mortal, boomed a voice that made the concepts of thunder and earthquakes seem quaint. You will explain your presence in the divine network. Marcus looked up from his notes to see 12 beings arranged in a semicircle around him, each radiating power that made his new divine abilities feel like a flashlight compared to supernovas. Yet his programmer's instincts immediately began analyzing what he was seeing, cataloging the different energy signatures and operational parameters. Oh, you're the senior administrators, he said with genuine delight. This is perfect timing. I've been documenting some critical inefficiencies in your current system architecture, and I have several recommendations for silence. The speaker was a figure that seemed to be made of crystallized time, each facet reflecting different moments from across history. I am Chronothes, master of temporal mechanics and guardian of cosmic order. You are Marcus Chun, unauthorized user with illegal access to divine privileges. Actually, the access was properly granted through official marriage protocols. Marcus corrected politely, checking his notes. Though I have to say your authentication system has some interesting vulnerabilities. Did you know that the binding ceremony creates a backdoor into the divine network that completely bypasses your usual security measures? That seems like a significant oversight. A goddess who appeared to be made of flowing starlight leaned forward. Are you critiquing our security protocols? Oh, I'm critiquing everything. No offense, but your entire operational framework appears to be running on legacy code that hasn't been updated since the foundational epoch. Some of these systems are so old, they predate basic error handling. Marcus flipped through his notebook enthusiastically. For instance, your prayer processing system is still using a first-in, first-out queue with no priority handling or load balancing. Do you have any idea how inefficient that is? The assembled gods exchanged glances that contained millennia of confusion. They were ancient beings of cosmic power, entities that had shaped the fundamental forces of reality since time began. They were not accustomed to having their methods questioned by someone who had been divine for less than a week. Furthermore, Marcus continued, warming to his subject, your domain separation protocols are unnecessarily rigid. There's so much potential for cross-platform integration that you're completely wasting. Lyralii manages water systems, but she can't interface with atmospheric management or geological processes directly. That's like having separate programs for input and output that can't communicate. It's no wonder you have so many redundancy issues. Chronothes felt something he hadn't experienced since the universe was young, a headache. Mortal, Marcus, the divine realm operates according to principles established at the dawn of creation. These systems have maintained reality stability for billions of years. Maintained, yes, but optimized? Absolutely not. Marcus pulled out a different notebook, this one filled with architectural diagrams that hurt to look at directly. I've been running some basic performance analyses, and your current efficiency rating is somewhere around 12% of theoretical maximum. You're essentially running the universe on a single-threaded processor when you could be using massively parallel processing. A god who appeared to be made of living mathematics materialized a cosmic display showing incomprehensible equations. Show us these analyses. Marcus grinned and began presenting what could only be described as a cosmic PowerPoint presentation, complete with charts, graphs, and improvement recommendations. As he spoke, his human perspective on divine power became increasingly apparent and increasingly unsettling to his audience. Where the gods saw eternal traditions and sacred methodologies, Marcus saw a system crying out for debugging and optimization. He had solutions for problems they hadn't even realized existed, workarounds for inefficiencies they'd accepted as natural laws, and suggestions for upgrades that made their ancient wisdom look like a child's first programming attempts. The prayer queue alone could be improved by implementing a machine learning algorithm to predict and pre-process common requests, he explained, gesturing to a diagram that showed divine attention distributed across multiple priority levels. And your miracle delivery system is completely reactive. With proper analytics, you could move to a predictive model that addresses problems before they become critical. This is unprecedented, whispered Thessarian to Chronothes. He's not just using divine power, he's understanding it in ways we never have. Worse, Chronothes replied grimly. His solutions are actually correct. Meanwhile, Marcus had moved on to explaining his preliminary designs for what he called Divine API 2.0, a complete overhaul of how divine power interface with reality. His proposals included standardized protocols for interdomain communication, automated conflict resolution systems, and something he called reality version control that would allow for safe testing of cosmic changes before implementation. The beautiful thing about this approach, Marcus said, completely oblivious to the growing alarm of his audience, is that it's fully backward compatible. All your existing functionality would remain exactly the same, but with dramatically improved performance and stability. Plus, the modular design would make it much easier to add new features or modify existing ones. A goddess of natural law who had remained silent throughout the presentation finally spoke. Young human, What you propose would require rebuilding the fundamental architecture of existence itself. Well, yes, Marcus agreed cheerfully. But think of it as refactoring rather than rebuilding. The core functionality stays the same. You're just optimizing the implementation. I estimate we could complete the migration in phases over several months, with minimal downtime to critical systems. Minimal downtime, Chronothes repeated slowly. To critical systems. You mean reality? Exactly. Though obviously we'd want to do extensive testing first. I was thinking we could set up a sandbox universe to prototype the changes. Nothing too elaborate. Maybe something the size of a small galaxy to start with. The silence that followed was the kind typically reserved for the moment between the lightning flash and the thunder, except this silence contained the concentrated disbelief of beings who had thought they'd seen everything. Finally, a god whose domain covered prophecy and future sight spoke up. We have concerns about allowing a mortal to modify the foundational structures of existence. Oh, I completely understand, Marcus said sincerely. This is a big change management project, but I've handled enterprise-level system migrations before, and the key is proper planning and phased implementation. I've already drafted a preliminary project timeline with risk assessments and rollback procedures. He handed them a document that materialized as crystallized mathematics, its contents causing several minor gods to experience what could only be described as conceptual vertigo. The migration plan includes comprehensive testing protocols, user acceptance criteria, and a detailed training program for all divine personnel. Marcus continued. I know change can be difficult, but once you see the performance improvements, I think you'll be very happy with the results. Chronothes looked around the chamber at his fellow administrators, seeing his own bewilderment reflected in their ancient faces. Marcus, he said carefully, what you're proposing would represent the most significant change to cosmic infrastructure since the original creation. I know. Isn't it exciting? That's one word for it, muttered the goddess of natural law. The god of mathematics had been studying Marcus's proposals with increasing fascination. These calculations, they're not just correct, they're elegant. This human has identified optimization possibilities we never even considered. Because you've been thinking like gods instead of like engineers, Marcus explained. Divine power is an amazing tool, but you've been using it like a hammer when it's actually more like a fully programmable quantum computer. The potential for elegant solutions is incredible once you start thinking in terms of algorithms and data structures. A newer god, relatively speaking only a few millennia old, raised what might have been a hand. What would be required to implement these changes? Well, first we need to establish a development team with representatives from each major domain. Then, we create a test environment where we can safely prototype the new architecture. I'd handle the core system design and integration, but we need subject matter experts for each specialized area. Marcus flipped to a new page in his notebook. I'm thinking a Scrum methodology with 2-week sprints would work well. We could have the basic framework operational within a quarter, with full feature parity achieved in 6 months. He's talking about rebuilding existence using mortal project management techniques, Thessarian whispered in awe. And the terrible thing is, it might actually work, Chronothes replied. Marcus had moved on to discussing the benefits of implementing automated monitoring and alerting systems for cosmic events. Right now, if something goes wrong with, say, stellar formation in a distant galaxy, you might not know about it until the problem cascades into something major. But with proper telemetry and event tracking, we could catch these issues early and implement corrective measures before they impact critical systems. The god of stellar mechanics, who had been dealing with exactly these kinds of problems for eons, leaned forward with interest. You could predict stellar collapse events? Not just predict, prevent, or at least mitigate, by monitoring key performance indicators and implementing automated response protocols. We could maintain optimal stellar health across all systems. Marcus sketched out a diagram showing predictive maintenance workflows applied to cosmic infrastructure. It's like preventive maintenance, but for the universe. This is either the most brilliant thing I've heard in a million years, or the most dangerous, the stellar god mused. Why not both? Marcus asked with genuine curiosity. Because, Chronothes said heavily, power of this magnitude has never been wielded by someone who thinks like you do. Divine power responds to will and intent, but you're approaching it with the systematic methodology of someone who debugs computer systems for a living. And that's bad because computer systems don't have souls. They don't have billions of years of accumulated wisdom and tradition. They don't understand the delicate balance required to maintain cosmic harmony. Marcus considered this for a moment. But they also don't have legacy bugs that have been classified as features for so long that everyone's forgotten they were actually problems. Look, I'm not saying we should throw out everything you've built. Your foundation is solid. It's lasted billions of years, which is impressive by any standard. But even the best systems need maintenance and upgrades. He pulled out another notebook, this one containing what he called his cosmic technical debt analysis. Take prayer processing, for example. Your current system handles about 10 to the 15th power requests per second across all mortals. But because of the inefficient queue structure, average response time is measured in weeks or months. With proper load balancing and parallel processing, we could get that down to real time for most requests. Real-time prayer responses? The goddess of mercy looked intrigued despite herself. Absolutely. And that's just the beginning. With predictive analytics, we could anticipate prayer patterns and preposition divine attention where it's most likely to be needed. Imagine being able to respond to crises before mortals even realize they need help. The assembled gods fell silent again, but this time it was the silence of entities processing possibilities they'd never imagined. Marcus waited patiently, recognizing the expression of people who were beginning to see familiar problems from an entirely new angle. There would be risks, the god of natural law said finally. Changes to fundamental systems always carry the possibility of unintended consequences. Absolutely, Marcus agreed. That's why we'd implement comprehensive testing and monitoring. Every change would be thoroughly validated in the test environment before production deployment. And we'd build in circuit breakers and automatic rollback capabilities for anything that shows unexpected behavior. You've really thought this through, Thessarian observed. It's what I do. Systems analysis, problem identification, solution design, implementation planning. The scale is bigger than I'm used to, but the principles are the same. Marcus closed his notebook and looked around the chamber. Look, I know I'm the new guy here, and I respect the incredible work you've all done maintaining reality for all these eons. But I also know that every system can be improved, and from what I've seen, your system is overdue for some serious optimization. Chronothes exchanged a long look with his fellow administrators. Marcus, what you're proposing, if it worked, it would revolutionize everything. Not just how we manage divine power, but how reality itself operates. I know. Isn't that awesome? And if it failed? Marcus shrugged. Then we roll back to the previous version and troubleshoot the issues. That's why you have proper change control procedures. Though honestly, based on my analysis, the current system is actually more fragile than what I'm proposing. You're running everything on basically a single point of failure with no redundancy planning. That's a disaster waiting to happen. He has a point, the god of mathematics said reluctantly. Our current architecture does have significant stability vulnerabilities. Plus, Marcus added, with proper automation and monitoring, you'd all have a lot more time to focus on the creative and strategic aspects of divine work instead of constantly managing routine maintenance tasks. This, more than any technical argument, seemed to resonate with the assembled gods. The prospect of spending less time on cosmic bureaucracy and more time on the kind of large-scale creative work they'd originally been designed for was genuinely appealing. Very well, Chronothes said finally. We will consider your proposals. But understand, mortal, that if we move forward with this, you will be held responsible for the consequences. I wouldn't have it any other way, Marcus replied cheerfully. But I should mention, I'll need full administrative access to the Divine Network to implement these changes, and probably a small team of volunteer gods to help with testing and validation. Full administrative access, Chronothes repeated flatly. Well, yes. You can't refactor a system without admin privileges. Don't worry, though. I'll implement proper access controls, and audit logging as part of the upgrade. In the cosmic distance, something vast and amused stirred again, and for the first time in eons, began to take a more active interest in the proceedings. The meeting concluded with what Marcus cheerfully called action items, and what the gods privately thought of as the beginning of the end of existence as we know it. But as they dispersed to their various domains, each carrying copies of Marcus's technical documentation, none of them could shake the feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, the strange mortal with his notebooks and optimization algorithms might be exactly what the universe needed. After all, even gods occasionally needed technical support. 6 weeks after the Divine Council meeting, Marcus had established what he called the Cosmic Development Lab in a pocket dimension that Lyralii had helped him create. The space looked like a cross between a server farm and a physics laboratory, with holographic displays showing real-time universal statistics and what appeared to be the cosmic equivalent of multiple computer monitors streaming endless data. Status report. Marcus said to his assembled team. 5 volunteer gods who had decided that the mortal's ideas were either brilliant enough to be worth the risk or dangerous enough that someone needed to keep an eye on him. Valdris, the god of stellar mechanics, materialized a display showing their test galaxy. Sandbox Universe Alpha is stable and ready for Phase 1 implementation. All stellar systems are operating within normal parameters, and we've successfully created a fully functional replica of local cosmic infrastructure. Excellent. Networking. Thessarian, who had become surprisingly enthusiastic about the project once he understood the potential improvements, gestured to a complex diagram that showed data flow between various divine domains. Interdomain communication protocols are tested and verified. We've reduced prayer routing overhead by 93%, and cross-domain collaboration efficiency is up by several orders of magnitude. Beautiful. Monitoring and alerts. Seraphina, goddess of natural law, looked slightly dazed by how quickly things were progressing. All automated systems are operational. We're tracking over 10 million cosmic variables in real time, with predictive algorithms that can forecast system anomalies up to 37 standard time units in advance. Marcus nodded approvingly as he updated his project timeline. Right on schedule. How's the user interface development coming? This question was directed at Lyralii, who had become the team's liaison between Marcus's technical vision and divine sensibilities. She materialized what looked like the most elegant control panel imaginable, an interface that somehow managed to make the complex operation of reality look as simple as adjusting the thermostat. The Divine Management Console is ready for beta testing, she reported. Gods can now monitor their domains, implement changes, and coordinate with other departments through a unified interface. Early feedback from the test users has been overwhelmingly positive. They like not having to memorize thousand-year-old incantations just to adjust river flow rates. Valdris added dryly. Marcus grinned. Excellent. And the big one, system performance optimization? The god of mathematics, Numerous, materialized a display that made even the other gods pause in amazement. Marcus, your architectural improvements are extraordinary. We're seeing efficiency gains that I didn't think were theoretically possible. Prayer processing is now operating at 97% efficiency with real-time response capabilities. Miracle deployment has been optimized to the point where we're actually ahead of demand for the first time in cosmic history. Wait, Marcus said, looking up from his notes. Ahead of demand? We're fixing problems before mortals realize they exist, Thessarian explained. The predictive systems you designed are identifying potential issues and automatically implementing corrective measures. Famines prevented before crops fail, natural disasters mitigated before they develop, diseases cured before symptoms appear. Marcus stared at the data streams flowing across his monitors. We're not just managing reality anymore. We're debugging it in real time. Is that bad? Lyralii asked, though she suspected she knew the answer from his expression. Bad? This is incredible. Do you realize what we've accomplished? We've essentially created a self-healing universe with predictive maintenance and automated optimization. Marcus was getting excited in the way that made reality around him shimmer with possibility. Though I should probably add some manual override protocols. Automation is great, but you want to maintain some human or divine oversight for the really big decisions. Speaking of big decisions, Valdris said carefully, we've been monitoring reactions from the broader divine community. Your project is generating significant attention. Marcus looked around at his team, noting their suddenly cautious expressions. What kind of attention? Thessaria materialized a cosmic communication display showing message traffic from across the divine realm. Requests for information about your optimization protocols. Demands for access to the new systems. Several formal complaints about unauthorized modifications to foundational reality. And 3 separate groups calling for your immediate banishment to the outer void, Serafina added helpfully. Marcus reviewed the messages with the same analytical approach he'd apply to user feedback on a software update. Mixed reception, but that's normal for major system upgrades. The early adopters love the improvements, the conservatives are resistant to change, and the middle group is waiting to see how it plays out. He made some notes. We should probably prepare a demonstration for the next Divine Council meeting. Nothing too fancy, just a side-by-side comparison of old system performance versus new system performance. Marcus, Lyralii said gently, some of the opposition is coming from very senior gods. Entities who predate most of creation and have significant influence over cosmic policy. Are they concerned about specific technical issues, or is this just general change resistance? Both, Numerous replied. They're worried about the long-term stability implications of your modifications. And they're uncomfortable with how quickly you've mastered systems that took them eons to understand. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Valid concerns. Long-term stability is critical, and rapid change can be destabilizing if it's not properly managed. But have you looked at the metrics? System stability is actually higher under the new architecture than it was before. He called up a comprehensive display showing cosmic health indicators spanning the past 6 weeks. Where the old systems showed the typical fluctuations and minor failures that had been considered normal, the new optimized systems showed remarkably stable performance with significantly fewer anomalies. The truth is, the old system was much more fragile than anyone realized. Marcus continued. It worked, but it was basically held together by divine willpower and accumulated patches that have been layered on top of each other for billions of years. What we built is actually more stable because it's designed from the ground up for reliability and fault tolerance. Try explaining that to gods who've been doing things the same way since time began, Valdris muttered. Challenge accepted, Marcus said cheerfully. But first, let's run a full system test. I want to stress test everything before we present to the council. What followed was the cosmic equivalent of a software deployment that would have been impressive even by mortal standards. Marcus's team systematically verified every component of their new divine architecture, running parallel operations that compared old and new methodologies across every conceivable scenario. They tested prayer processing under peak loads, simulating the kind of massive demand that occurred during global crises. The new system handled 10 times the traffic with better response times and 0 dropped requests. They stress-tested miracle deployment by creating complex, multi-domain scenarios that required coordination between different divine specialties. The new interdomain communication protocols made collaboration so seamless that problems that would have previously required committee meetings and lengthy negotiations were resolved automatically. They even tested disaster scenarios. What would happen if major cosmic systems failed simultaneously? The new architecture's built-in redundancy and Automatic failover capabilities meant that critical universal functions could continue operating even if primary systems went offline. "This is remarkable," Serafina said as they reviewed the test results. "We've eliminated most of the single points of failure that existed in the old system." More than that, Numerous added, studying performance metrics that defied his previous understanding of cosmic engineering. "We've created a system that actually gets more stable as it scales. The larger and more complex the universe becomes, the more robust our architecture becomes." Marcus nodded, satisfied with the results. Distributed processing and dynamic load balancing. The key is designing systems that can adapt to changing conditions instead of just brute forcing through problems. "You make it sound simple," Thessarian observed. "The concepts are simple. It's the implementation that's complex. But that's why we built comprehensive documentation and training materials." Marcus gestured to a vast library of cosmic knowledge that contained everything from basic tutorials to advanced troubleshooting guides. Any god should be able to understand and use these systems regardless of their technical background. This was actually a revolutionary concept in the divine realm, where complex cosmic operations had traditionally been the exclusive domain of entities with specialized knowledge accumulated over eons. The idea that divine power could be made accessible and user-friendly was almost as radical as the technical improvements themselves. "There's something else," Lyralii said, calling up a display that showed data flows Marcus hadn't seen before. "The system is learning. The AI components you built into the optimization protocols are beginning to identify patterns and make improvements on their own." Marcus leaned forward, studying the autonomous improvements with professional interest. Evolutionary optimization. The system is essentially debugging itself and implementing performance enhancements without manual intervention. He paused, considering the implications. "That's actually a little concerning. We should probably implement some constraints around autonomous modifications." "Why?" Valdris asked. "The improvements are clearly beneficial, because unconstrained optimization can lead to unexpected behaviors. The system might find solutions that work perfectly from a technical perspective, but have unintended consequences we haven't thought of." Marcus made some notes about implementing oversight protocols for autonomous system improvements. "It's like the difference between a program that works correctly and a program that works correctly for the right reasons." "I'm not sure I understand the distinction," Serafina admitted. Marcus thought for a moment, then created a simple demonstration. He showed them a cosmic optimization that had automatically improved the gravitational efficiency of a star system by adjusting orbital mechanics. The improvement was mathematically perfect and resulted in better energy distribution and planetary stability. "Now watch what happens if we apply the same optimization logic to a system with inhabited planets," he said, running the scenario with mortal populations included in the calculations. The result was technically perfect from a cosmic mechanics standpoint, but would have relocated several billion mortals to slightly different orbital positions without any consideration for their existing civilizations. "Ah," Thessarian said, understanding immediately. "The system optimized for cosmic efficiency without considering the social and cultural implications." "Exactly. This is why we need oversight protocols and value constraints built into any autonomous optimization systems." Marcus was already designing safeguards as he spoke. "We want the system to be smart and adaptive, but we need to make sure it understands the full context of its actions, not just the immediate technical objectives." As they worked on implementing these additional safety measures, none of them noticed the growing disturbance in the broader divine realm. Marcus's optimized systems were working so well that their effects were becoming impossible to ignore. Prayers that had gone unanswered for centuries were suddenly being fulfilled. Natural disasters were being prevented or mitigated with unprecedented effectiveness. The overall health and stability of mortal civilizations was improving at a rate that was raising uncomfortable questions about why things hadn't been this good before. The gods who weren't part of Marcus's project were beginning to realize that their traditional methods looked increasingly obsolete by comparison. And some of the older, more conservative entities were starting to view the humans' improvements not as beneficial upgrades, but as a fundamental threat to the cosmic order they had worked eons to establish. "We have a problem," Chronothes announced an emergency session of the Senior Divine Council. The mortal's modifications are spreading beyond his original mandate. Spreading how? Demanded Celestrix, goddess of cosmic harmony and one of the most powerful entities in creation. Other gods are requesting access to his optimization protocols. They want to implement his improvements in their own domains. Chronothes materialized a display showing the expanding influence of Marcus's architectural changes. At current adoption rates, the entire divine infrastructure will be running on his systems within a year. And this is problematic because, said Vorthanax, god of primal chaos and one of the few entities older than Chronothes, we have no idea what the long-term consequences of these changes might be. The mortal has rebuilt fundamental cosmic systems based on principles we don't understand, using methodologies that didn't exist when reality was first established. Celestrix studied the performance data that even the conservative gods couldn't argue with. The results speak for themselves. Universal stability is at an all-time high. Efficiency metrics are beyond anything we've previously achieved, and mortal satisfaction ratings. She paused, clearly surprised by what she was reading. Mortal satisfaction ratings have improved by 600%. That's exactly the problem, Vorthanax growled. Reality isn't supposed to be optimized for mortal convenience. There's a natural order, a cosmic balance that has maintained itself for billions of years. This human is disrupting patterns that predate his species by eons. "Are you suggesting we revert the improvements?" another god asked. "I'm suggesting we consider whether improvements that come this easily might be too good to be true," Vorthanax replied. "No system is perfect. If this mortal has found solutions to problems we've struggled with for eons, either he's the greatest genius in cosmic history, or he's missing something critical that we understand, and he doesn't." In his development lab, Marcus sneezed, a distinctly mortal response that made Lyralii smile despite the serious conversation they were having about expanding their pilot program to additional cosmic domains. "Someone talking about you?" she asked. "Probably. I imagine our project is generating a lot of discussion." Marcus pulled up a monitoring display that showed the broader divine network. "Actually, that reminds me, we should probably set up some PR protocols for managing the rollout. Change management isn't just about technical implementation. It's about helping users understand and adapt to new systems." PR protocols. Thessarian looked confused. Public relations. Communication strategies for explaining the benefits of a new systems and addressing concerns from users who might be resistant to change. Marcus was already sketching out a presentation strategy. Most objections to system upgrades come from fear of the unknown. If we can clearly demonstrate how the new architecture works and why it's better, rational actors will eventually come around. "And irrational actors?" Valdris asked. Marcus grinned. "That's what rollback procedures are for. But I'm optimistic. The performance improvements are pretty compelling evidence that we're on the right track." He had no idea that some of the most powerful entities in creation were, at that very moment, debating whether his optimizations represented the greatest advancement in cosmic engineering since the original creation or the beginning of the end of divine authority as they knew it. The only thing everyone agreed on was that Marcus Chun was no longer just a mortal who had accidentally gained divine power. He had become something unprecedented in cosmic history, a being who understood divine systems better than the gods themselves, and who had the technical skills to rebuild reality according to principles that made perfect sense, but challenged every assumption about how the universe was supposed to work. The question was whether that was the best thing that had ever happened to creation, or the most dangerous. The confrontation came on a Tuesday, which Marcus would later reflect was somehow perfectly appropriate for what amounted to a hostile takeover attempt of the universe's operating system. He was in his development lab, working on what he decided to call Divine Power 3.0, a complete integration platform that would allow seamless collaboration between all cosmic domains, when reality suddenly shifted around him. Not the gentle folding he'd grown accustomed to, but the kind of harsh dimensional ripping that suggested someone was very angry and not particularly concerned about causing collateral damage. Marcus found himself standing in what could only be described as a cosmic courtroom. Towering entities arranged in judgment, their combined presence making the space around him feel heavy with authority and barely contained power. At the center sat three figures that made even the other gods seem diminished by comparison, being so fundamental to existence that looking at them directly required Marcus to consciously debug his perception protocols to avoid sensory overload. Marcus Chun of Earth intoned the central figure, whose voice contained the sound of galaxies being born. You stand accused of unauthorized modification of cosmic infrastructure, reckless endangerment of universal stability, and violation of the fundamental principles upon which reality is based. Marcus looked around the assembled court with professional interest, noting the architecture of the space and the way divine power flowed through the formal structures. This is impressive. The energy requirements alone for maintaining this kind of dimensional stability must be enormous. Though I notice you're using some fairly inefficient power distribution methods, I could probably optimize this setup to reduce overhead by 30 or 40%. The silence that followed was the kind typically associated with events like supernovas or continental drift, vast, cosmic, and ominous. "Did you just?" asked the figure on the right, whose form seemed to contain the mathematical principles underlying all existence. "Offer to optimize our courtroom?" "Well, yes. I mean, why wouldn't you want better efficiency? You're clearly trying to create an atmosphere of imposing authority, but the energy cost of maintaining this configuration could be dramatically reduced with some basic architectural improvements." Marcus pulled out his notebook. Somehow it had survived the dimensional transition, and began sketching. If you implemented a distributed processing model instead of centralized power projection, you could achieve the same psychological impact with maybe 20% of the current resource expenditure. Chronothes, who had been appointed to present the case against Marcus, stepped forward with an expression that suggested he was beginning to understand why the human had become such a divisive figure. "Honored arbiters, this is exactly what we're dealing with. The defendant cannot encounter any system, no matter how sacred or ancient, without immediately trying to reprogram it. Sacred and ancient doesn't mean efficient," Marcus pointed out reasonably. "In fact, in my experience, sacred and ancient usually means accumulated technical debt that no one wants to address because it might break something else." He looked up at the arbiters with genuine curiosity. "Speaking of which, I've been meaning to ask, what's the governance model for cosmic infrastructure changes? Because from what I've observed, you're basically running everything on an ad hoc basis with no formal change control procedures." The arbiter on the left, whose domain encompassed the primal forces from which all other powers derived, leaned forward slightly. "Governance model? You know, how decisions get made about fundamental changes to universal systems. Who has authority to approve modifications, what the testing and validation requirements are, how you handle rollbacks if something goes wrong." Marcus was warming to the subject, because right now it seems like anyone with sufficient divine power can make arbitrary changes to reality, and that's a recipe for chaos. You need proper oversight, documentation requirements, impact analysis. "We are the oversight," the central arbiter said with the kind of authority that had been making cosmic decisions since the beginning of time. "We are the governance. We are the fundamental structure of reality." "Right, but that's not really governance. That's just concentrated power. True governance requires transparent processes, accountability mechanisms, checks, and balances." Marcus flipped to a new page and began outlining organizational charts. "What you have is more like a monarchy, which might have worked fine when the universe was smaller and simpler, but Complex systems require distributed decision-making frameworks. The assembled gods were now watching this exchange with the fascination of entities witnessing something completely unprecedented. No mortal had ever criticized the Arbiter's management methodology. Most mortals couldn't even survive in their presence. Furthermore, Marcus continued, your current approach creates significant single points of failure. If something happened to any of you, or if you disagreed on a critical decision, the entire cosmic infrastructure could deadlock. That's why you need formal procedures and delegation frameworks. Vorthanax, who had been advocating for Marcus's immediate banishment, stepped forward with visible satisfaction. Honored arbiters, this proves our point. The mortal shows no respect for cosmic authority or the wisdom of eons. He sees our most fundamental institutions as problems to be solved rather than eternal truths to be preserved. Well, yes, Marcus agreed. Everything can be improved, even fundamental institutions. Especially fundamental institutions, actually because they tend to accumulate legacy issues over time. The mathematical arbiter materialized a display showing the performance metrics for Marcus's optimized systems. Before we proceed with judgment, explain these results. Your modifications show improvements that should be theoretically impossible. Marcus brightened. Finally, someone wanted to talk about the technical details. Oh, those are actually pretty straightforward once you understand the underlying architecture. The key insight was recognizing that divine power operates more like a distributed computing network than a traditional hierarchical command structure. He launched into what could only be described as the most advanced technical presentation in cosmic history, explaining how he'd identified bottlenecks in divine communication protocols, eliminated redundancies in cosmic processing, and implemented automated optimization algorithms that continuously tuned universal parameters for maximum efficiency. The beautiful thing about the new architecture, he concluded, is that it scales automatically. The more complex the universe becomes, the more sophisticated the optimization systems become to handle that complexity. It's like having a self-upgrading infrastructure that gets better over time instead of accumulating technical debt. The arbiters exchanged glances that contained entire conversations. Finally, the central figure spoke. Marcus Chun, your modifications have indeed improved universal performance beyond anything we thought possible. Your systematic approach to divine power has produced results that challenge our understanding of what reality can be. Thank you, Marcus said, though he could sense a but coming. However, improvement is not the only consideration. Stability, tradition, the preservation of cosmic order. These things also have value. Your changes, while effective, represent a fundamental shift in how reality operates. Some would argue that mortals were never meant to wield this kind of transformative power. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. I understand the concern. Change is always risky, especially at this scale. But the alternative, maintaining systems that are inefficient and fragile just because they're traditional, that's risky too. More risky, in my opinion. He called up his own displays, showing long-term stability projections that painted a concerning picture of the old systems. The truth is, your legacy architecture was showing signs of accumulated stress that would have led to critical failures within a few thousand years. Maybe sooner. My optimizations didn't just improve performance. They probably prevented a cosmic crash that would have been catastrophic. Explain, demanded the Primal Forces Arbiter. Marcus showed them data projections that revealed the gradual degradation patterns in the original divine systems. Micro-failures that had been building up over eons, inefficiencies that were slowly compounding, and stress fractures in fundamental reality structures that had gone unnoticed because they operated on timescales that even gods found difficult to perceive. Your old system was like a building that had been repeatedly patched and modified without updating the foundation, Marcus explained. It looked stable, but it was actually becoming increasingly fragile with each modification. Eventually, it would have reached a critical point where any significant stress could have caused a cascade failure. The mathematical arbiter ran calculations that verified Marcus's projections. These failure modes, they're real. we could have experienced universal system collapse. And you fixed this by completely rebuilding our infrastructure, the Central Arbiter said slowly. Without asking permission. I fixed it by applying proper engineering principles to divine power, Marcus corrected. And I didn't ask permission because, frankly, your approval processes seemed likely to take several centuries, and the failure risks were immediate enough that waiting wasn't really an option. Chronothes stepped forward again. Honored arbiters, regardless of the technical merits, the defendant acted unilaterally to modify fundamental reality. He assumed authority that was never granted to him. Actually, Marcus said, I acted within the authority that was granted to me through proper divine channels when I married Lyrelii. The access rights I received included administrative privileges to her domain, which interconnected with other domains through the cosmic network. I just exercised those privileges more thoroughly than anyone expected. He pulled out yet another notebook, this one containing legal documentation that would have made cosmic lawyers weep. I've actually been very careful to stay within my authorized scope. Every modification I made was technically legal under divine protocol, properly documented, and implemented through official channels. I just did it more efficiently than anyone thought possible. The arbiter spent several moments reviewing Marcus's legal analysis, their expressions shifting from stern authority to what could only be described as professional confusion. You're telling us, the mathematical arbiter said finally, that you revolutionized the entire cosmic infrastructure using only the standard access rights granted to divine spouses? Standard access rights properly utilized, yes. Though to be fair, I did discover some significant security vulnerabilities in the process. You should probably patch those. The Central Arbiter made a sound that might have been cosmic laughter. Marcus Chun of Earth, you are either the most dangerous mortal who has ever existed, or the most beneficial. Possibly both. I prefer to think of myself as a systems engineer who happens to work at universal scale, Marcus replied, though I understand that perspective might be uncommon in divine circles. The Primal Forces Arbiter leaned back, studying Marcus with what might have been respect. What you've accomplished should not have been possible. Divine power isn't supposed to respond to mortal methodologies. Reality isn't supposed to be debuggable. Maybe it wasn't before, Marcus said thoughtfully. But maybe that's because no one ever tried to understand it as a system rather than just as a tool. Divine power actually follows very logical principles once you map out the underlying architecture. It's not magic. It's just very advanced technology that no one had bothered to document properly. And now, Marcus grinned. Now it's documented, optimized, and ready for the next upgrade cycle. I've been thinking about implementing some kind of distributed consciousness protocols that would allow divine entities to pool processing power for large-scale cosmic projects. Imagine what you could accomplish if you could dynamically allocate divine resources based on real-time need assessments. The assembled gods and arbiters stared at him in a silence that contained equal parts awe and terror. Marcus Chin wasn't just suggesting improvements to divine power. He was proposing to turn the entire cosmic hierarchy into a seamlessly integrated network of cooperative intelligence. The question before this tribunal, the Central Arbiter said finally, is whether to allow these changes to continue or to revert reality to its previous state and place restrictions on the defendant's access to divine power. Honored arbiters, Thessarian said, stepping forward from a group of gods who had been working with Marcus. Before you make that decision, I request permission to present evidence on behalf of the defendant. Granted, Thessarian materialized displays showing the real-world impact of Marcus's optimizations. Mortals whose prayers have been answered for the first time in years. Natural disasters prevented or mitigated. Diseases cured. Conflicts resolved through divine intervention that was finally efficient enough to be applied consistently rather than randomly. The defendant's modifications haven't just improved our operational efficiency, Thessarian continued. They've enabled us to fulfill our responsibilities to mortal creation more completely than ever before. We're actually helping people instead of just maintaining the status quo. Other gods stepped forward to add their testimony. Stories of long-standing cosmic problems solved overnight through Marcus's systematic approach. Examples of interdomain cooperation that had been impossible under the old system. Evidence that divine power, properly optimized, could be far more beneficial than anyone had imagined. The mathematical arbiter ran final calculations on the evidence presented. The data is conclusive. Universal welfare under the defendant's systems is optimal by every metric we can measure. The question remains, the central arbiter said, whether optimality is more important than stability and tradition. Marcus stepped forward one last time. Honored arbiters, with respect, optimality is stability. A properly designed system doesn't need constant manual intervention to remain stable. It maintains itself and adapts to changing conditions automatically. What you call tradition is actually just accumulated technical debt masquerading as wisdom. He paused, looking up at the three most powerful entities in creation with the expression of someone who had spent his career explaining complex technical concepts to management. You can roll back my changes if you want, but the underlying problems that made those changes necessary will still exist. The system failures I prevented will eventually happen anyway, just slower and with more collateral damage. You'll be back to managing crisis after crisis instead of preventing them. And eventually, something will break that you can't fix manually. The arbiters conferred in the kind of rapid divine communication that compressed eons of debate into moments of cosmic time. When they turned back to Marcus, their expressions had shifted to something that might have been resignation. Marcus Chon of Earth, the central arbiter, announced, "This tribunal finds your modifications to cosmic infrastructure to be technically sound, operationally beneficial, and legally authorized." Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. However, the arbiter continued, "Your methods have been disruptive, and your attitude toward cosmic authority has been problematic." "I understand," Marcus said diplomatically. "Therefore, this tribunal hereby grants you official recognition as Chief Systems Administrator for Universal Infrastructure, with full authority to continue your optimization projects under proper oversight and accountability measures." The silence that followed was the sound of cosmic history pivoting on a single decision. Additionally, the mathematical arbiter added, "You are hereby required to establish formal training programs for divine entities who wish to understand and utilize your optimization methodologies. And you will implement proper change control procedures for all future modifications to cosmic infrastructure." Marcus was already pulling out his notebook. "I can have a preliminary training curriculum ready by next week. And the change control procedures are actually something I've been wanting to implement anyway. Proper governance frameworks will make everything more stable and efficient." The primal forces arbiter made what might have been a cosmic sigh. "Somehow, we suspect you'll find ways to optimize those procedures as well." "Well, yes," Marcus agreed cheerfully. "Everything can be improved." 6 months later, Marcus's Cosmic Development Lab had evolved into what he called Divine Infrastructure Services, a full-scale operation that provided technical support, training, and system optimization for the entire divine realm. His team had grown to include dozens of gods who had embraced the systematic approach to divine power, and together they were working on projects that would have been unimaginable under the old system. Prayer response times were now measured in seconds rather than years. Miracles were deployed with the efficiency of modern cloud computing. Natural disasters had become increasingly rare as predictive systems identified and prevented problems before they developed. And mortal civilizations throughout the universe were experiencing an unprecedented era of stability and prosperity. Status report. Marcus said to his expanded team during their weekly optimization review meeting. Prayer processing efficiency is holding steady at 99.7%, reported Valdris, who had become Marcus's deputy for cosmic infrastructure management. "We're actually running ahead of demand for the first time in cosmic history. Miracle deployment is operating at full automation for routine requests, with complex situations escalated to divine specialists as designed," added Thessarian. now head of Divine Customer Relations. Predictive systems have prevented 14 natural disasters, resolved 37 potential conflicts, and identified 17 disease outbreaks before they could spread, Serafina reported from her position as head of proactive intervention systems. Marcus nodded, updating his performance tracking spreadsheets. Excellent. Any issues or concerns? The usual complaints from conservative factions about the pace of change, Lyralii said diplomatically. But adoption rates continue to climb as more gods experience the benefits of optimized systems. And there's something else, Numerous added, calling up displays that showed data flows Marcus had never seen before. The AI optimization components you built into the system are beginning to suggest improvements that go beyond technical efficiency. They're starting to identify optimization opportunities for things like beauty, creativity, and joy. Marcus leaned forward with interest. Show me. What Numerous showed him was a collection of system modifications that were purely aesthetic. Changes that served no functional purpose except to make reality more elegant, more beautiful, more satisfying to experience. The AI had somehow learned to optimize for qualitative factors that couldn't be measured in traditional performance metrics. This is fascinating, Marcus said, studying the patterns. The system is developing aesthetic sensibilities. It's not just solving functional problems. It's trying to make the universe more beautiful. Is that good or bad? Valdris asked. Marcus thought about it for a moment, then smiled. I think it's exactly what we hoped would happen. We built a system that could learn and improve itself, and it's learned that efficiency isn't the only thing worth optimizing. It's developing wisdom. He looked around at his team, gods who had once managed reality through tradition and hierarchy, but who had learned to work together through systematic collaboration and shared technical understanding. I think we've accomplished something remarkable here, he said quietly. We haven't just optimized the universe. We've created a foundation for whatever comes next, a system that can grow and adapt and become more than any of us imagined possible. In the cosmic distance, something vast and amused stirred one final time, and across reality, those sensitive to such things felt a gentle presence that might have been approval. Marcus Chun had started as a software engineer who accidentally married a goddess. He had become something unprecedented, a mortal who had not only mastered divine power, but had taught it to transcend its own limitations. He had looked at the universe itself and asked the most human question possible. Could this be better? And then he had made it so. The gods who had once seen him as a dangerous anomaly now understood that he was something far more significant. Proof that intelligence, creativity, and the desire for improvement could transform any system, no matter how ancient or complex. He was, in the end, exactly what humanity had always been at its best, the species that looked at the impossible and treated it as an engineering challenge. And as reality itself continued to evolve under the guidance of systems that grew more sophisticated and wise with each passing day, Marcus went back to his notebooks, already sketching designs for improvements he hadn't even thought of yet. After all, everything could still be better.